Psychic Self-Defense by Dion Fortune. Narrated by Matthew Schmitz. Part 2. Differential Diagnosis. 9. Distinction between objective psychic attack and subjective psychic disturbance. Psychism, however genuine, is a fruitful cause of self-delusion. A psychic is invariably highly sensitive and suggestible. This is the basis of his gifts. Psychism not being a normal development, among Europeans at any rate, the psychic is, in the language of nautical engineers, over-engined for his hull. He is consequently unstable, liable to violent emotional reactions, and in general exhibits those aberrations of conduct we are accustomed to associate with artistic genius. Unless a psychic is trained, disciplined, protected, and watched over by those who understand his condition, his psychism is never reliable because he is blown about by every wind of influence. The psychic and the neurotic are closely akin in their reactions to life, but the neurotic differs from the psychic in that instead of being over-engined for his hull, he is underhulled for his engines. The result is the same, however, a discrepancy between the force and form with the consequent inability to maintain a central, reasoned, directing control. The technique of the occult discipline is largely directed towards maintaining control of the disparate forces, compensating the sensitiveness of the psychic and protecting him from unwanted impressions. It is never well to learn how to open the door of the unseen, unless at the same time one learns how to close and latch it. As was noted in the introduction, it is comparatively seldom that the unseen comes in search of human beings. As the caterpillar told Alice concerning the puppy dog, "You let it alone, and it will let you alone." But if we begin to study occultism, or even to dabble in it, sooner or later we are liable to obtain results, provided, of course, that the system we are using contains the germs of efficacy. In the case of a person who is coming onto the path for the first time, progress is necessarily slow and laborious, but a soul that has taken initiation in previous incarnations may reopen the latent psychic faculties so rapidly that the problem of maintaining the harmonized coordination of the personality becomes a serious one. It is exceedingly common for a person who is making his first contact with the occult movement to experience psychic disturbance. This is sometimes attributed to evil influences, sometimes to evil entities. Neither of these inferences may be just. There is a third possibility, which is responsible for by far the greater percentage of victims, the mere fact that consciousness is being disturbed by an unaccustomed force. How common a thing it is to see a child feverish and fretful during the first few days of a seaside holiday. It is not necessarily sickening for an illness. The strong air and unaccustomed food and the excitement of its new surroundings are disturbing its sensitive physical equilibrium. So it is when the neophyte is disturbed at the outset of his occult career. The unaccustomed vibrations are upsetting him, and he is having an attack of occult indigestion. In both cases, the treatment is the same, temporary restriction of the diet, which has caused the disturbance. Another cause of psychic upset may lie in the partial recovery of the memories of past incarnations, if these include any painful episodes, especially such as are connected with esoteric studies. The entry of occult concepts into the conscious mind tends to awaken the subconscious memory of similar experiences in past lives. The emotion surrounding a memory is invariably recovered before the actual image of the incident. This is one of the best tests for the accuracy of memories of past lives. This foreshadowing emotion may hang about for a long time on the threshold of consciousness before the images clarify sufficiently to become tangible. If the emotion that is rising over the horizon is of a painful nature, it may cause considerable disturbance, and in the absence of an experienced advisor may be attributed to an occult attack, or to the psychic perception of evil influences in the occult group to which the neophyte is affiliated. It is necessary to use very great caution in drawing conclusions from the psychic impressions of an inexperienced student who is apt to be as full of alarms as a 2-year-old thoroughbred. On the other hand, the instinctive reactions of a pure and sensitive soul are not to be ignored. There are such things as black lodges and evil entities. We must not allow the cry of "wolf, wolf" to make us either callous or careless. In any case, the victim is suffering remediable discomfort. It is an exceedingly difficult thing to determine psychically whether the complainant has reasonable grounds for his feelings, for his own imagination will have filled his atmosphere with menacing thought forms. It is no simple matter to decide whether these thought forms are subjective or objective. The wisest way is to rely on such evidence as is capable of objective examination, and inquire into the record of the particular group or occultist against whom the charges are being brought. But it is equally necessary to inquire into the record of the person who is bringing the charges. That that person is filled with the loftiest ideals is no proof that he has a level head, a clear and unbiased judgment, or appreciation of the nature of evidence. A person need not be a deliberate liar to make statements that are very far from the truth. Another factor which has to be reckoned with is the vagaries of the sex instinct in a person in whom that instinct is repressed. Consider the case of a woman, perhaps no longer young, whose circumstances for the first time permit her to follow her own inclinations, a very common case with home-keeping women who have to wait for dead men's shoes before they can set out on life's journey. She takes up occultism, towards which she may have always had a leaning, and joins some circle for study and possibly ritual initiation. The leader of that circle will, in all probability, be a person of strong individuality. The inexperienced, love-starved newcomer is glamoured. Ritual is a very stimulating thing, as Anglo-Catholic clergy have found to their cost. The woman, possibly quite ignorant of the facts of life, finds herself strangely stirred. She is frightened. She senses that something of the kingdom of Pan is approaching. Her instincts will usually guide her truly enough in divining the source from which the disturbing influence proceeds. She will point an unerring finger at the magnetic male. She will seldom take into account the reactions of the female in the presence of the male. If she is a woman ignorant of the facts of life, the charge she brings will usually take the form of an accusation of hypnotic influence. She does not realize that nature is the hypnotist. If she is a woman who knows something of the world, the charge may be of improper advances. One glance at the woman is usually enough to tell us whether there is likely to be any foundation in this charge or not. It is seldom the young and pretty girl, who might reasonably be apprehensive, who is the teller of these stories. It is a curious fact that it never seems to occur to the complainants either to take refuge in flight or put the matter in the hands of a solicitor. If at the end of a long tale, full of dark hints and unspeakable innuendos, the question is asked, "What exactly did he do?" the answer usually is, "He looked at me in a meaning way." When one of these stories is being told, we should be wise to give more attention to the bearing of the person who is telling it than to the facts alleged. This will usually yield the more valuable information. It is the most difficult thing in the world to get a genuine victim to speak. A woman who is broadcasting the tale of her own shame is usually a woman scorned, and the reliability of her testimony in the matter is in inverse ratio to her loquacity. Do not let us forget that it takes two to make a scandal, as well as a quarrel, and the person who admits a mistake and asks for help to retrace wandering footsteps is much more likely to be worth helping than one who claims to be even as the angels in heaven, where there is neither marrying nor giving in marriage. So great is the need for caution in assessing the facts in a charge of immorality that the law courts will not accept the evidence of the victim, even on oath and under cross-examination, unless it is supported by additional testimony. Equally well does the doctor know the same type of mentality, and a common form of mental derangement is called old maid's insanity, even in the textbooks. I could cite cases by the dozen in exemplification of the preceding statements, but they have not sufficient occult interest to justify their inclusion in these pages. If the leader of the group is a woman, a different set of reactions comes into play, though the same causes are at work. It is not generally realized that the fixation or crush of one woman for another is really a substitute love affair, as is proved by the fact that the girl who has plenty of admirers, or the woman who is happily married, is never given to them. In this case, just as much as in the normal heterosexual attraction, hell knows no fury like a woman scorned. It is not, for obvious reasons, possible to bring charges of improper behavior. Though in one accusation this was alleged against me, and I was accused of being a man in disguise and attempting to seduce the complainant, and the charge found believers. The charge brought in such cases usually takes one of two forms, the mechanism being either, "You don't love me, therefore you are cruel, I have been badly treated," and the most far-fetched instances are raked up in support of this charge, or, "You don't love me, therefore I hate you, the attraction you have for me is hypnotic." It must be borne in mind, in assessing these charges, that a trained occultist, especially if of high grade, has an exceedingly magnetic personality, and this is apt to prove disturbing to those who are unaccustomed to high-tension psychic forces. For whereas the person who is ripe for development will unfold the higher consciousness rapidly in the atmosphere of a high-grade initiate, the person who is not ready may find these influences profoundly disturbing. An adept who allows unsuitable persons to enter his magnetic field is blameworthy for his lack of discrimination and discretion, but he cannot justly be charged with abuse of occult powers. He emanates force involuntarily and cannot help himself. The greater adepts always live in seclusion, for not only do they need solitude for their work, but their influence upon unprepared souls produces too violent a reaction, and it ends in the cross or the hemlock cup. We must not be unmindful of the fact that the person who comes to us with a long tale of occult attack and asks for assistance, especially financial assistance, may simply be pitching a yarn, and should use the same discrimination that we would in listening to any other hard luck story, trying to differentiate between the deserving and the undeserving. I knew a man who allowed an alleged adept who was undergoing an alleged occult attack to take refuge in his studio and returned after a short absence to find that the alleged one had been selling the furniture to buy drink, and there was every reason to believe that the only spirits who were in any way concerned with his troubles had entered the studio in bottles. The complaints of occult attack may have their source in nothing more or less than the delusions of the insane, and it does not necessarily invalidate this fact that a second person can be found to give supporting evidence. There is a curious form of insanity known to alienists called folie à deux, in which two people intimately associated together share the same delusions. It is usually found in such cases that one is definitely insane, and that the other is of a hysterical type and has become imbued with the delusions of her associate by means of suggestion. I use the feminine pronoun because this form of insanity is rare with males. It usually occurs with two sisters or with two women living together. There is another pitfall for which the inexperienced do well to watch out in their dealings with the person who complains of an occult attack. Insanity may be periodic in its manifestation, outbreaks of acute mania alternating with periods of complete sanity. This periodic aspect should always be watched for in the case of women, in whom any temperamental instability becomes greatly exaggerated during the times of the monthly periods, at the change of life, during pregnancy, and in fact at any period when the sex life is stirred to activity, whether emotionally or physically. It is also well to bear in mind that in pathological cases the periodicity of a woman's function may be greatly disturbed. I had a sharp lesson in this respect upon one occasion which exemplifies the need of caution. We had, at the introduction of one of our members, received into one of our community houses a woman whose husband, a well-known man in public life, refused to live with her, so I was told, and had made several attempts to do away with her, and threatened to have her certified insane if she in any way resisted him. These facts were vouched for by a circle of friends to whom both husband and wife were known. I kept this lady under observation for a month in order to see whether there was anything to justify the charge of insanity, and seeing nothing, took up her case. At the 7th week, however, trouble ensued. She got into a great state of excitement, declared that she was being starved and ill-treated by the person who, in my absence, was responsible for the house. 7 weeks later we had another bout in which she said that evil influences were proceeding from a certain cupboard in her room, wandered about the house in exceedingly inadequate apparel, and lost all self-control. This attack also passed off in a few days. It came out in the end that she suffered from chronic appendicitis, which involved the right ovary, and whenever her exceedingly irregular menstruation occurred, she went right off her head for a few days. The position was greatly complicated by the fact that in the interregnum she was, to all outward appearances, perfectly sane. After she left our community house, she told exactly the same stories about us that she had previously been telling about her husband. The out-and-out lunatic is a much less serious problem to society than these borderline cases. They need dealing with extremely cautiously, for they can cause an immense amount of trouble. When an insanity has once become well developed, anyone who has had experience of lunatics has little difficulty in recognizing it. Each type of insanity has its characteristic, facial expression, and even gait, but it is not so simple a matter for even the expert to recognize an insanity in its incipient stages. Lunatics are exceedingly plausible, and if they have picked up something of the jargon of the occultist or spiritualist, can make out an extraordinarily good case for themselves. Even the experienced alienist often has to keep a case under observation in order to ascertain whether it is an actual insanity or not. In a field where experts are frequently in doubt, what is the layman to do who finds himself confronted by a case which rouses his suspicions? He cannot be expected to recognize insanity when he sees it, but his own common sense ought to be sufficient to enable him to recognize sanity. In other words, let him suspend judgment upon the alleged facts and concentrate upon the question of motive. It is here he will find his best indication. If a person can offer no valid explanation as to the reasons for the attack that is being made upon him, nor as to its cause or origin, we can probably rest assured that it originates in his own imagination. In one case which came into my hands for help, the victim declared that he was being persecuted by telepathic suggestion. I inquired as to the origin of this persecution, and he said that some people who lived in the next flat used to sit in a circle and concentrate upon him. I asked him why they did this. He did not know. I asked him how he knew they did it, and he could not tell me. He merely reiterated that they did it, although he admitted that he had never been inside their flat, never, in fact, even spoke to them except to exchange a good morning on the stairs. It was immediately apparent that there was no conceivable motive that could cause these people to go to the trouble of persecuting him. If anyone has ever tried any experiments with telepathic suggestion, they will know what intense concentration it requires, and in fact what hard work it is, and one cannot possibly imagine anybody putting themselves to the trouble of doing it over long periods of time without a very definite motive. I have, however, heard of a well-authenticated case of a woman who had a liaison with a married man attacking his wife in this way. I have also myself known of 2 cases in which a certain individual, at one time prominent in transcendental circles, in connection with what the newspapers impolitely called his prayer shop, and equally well known in the city in connection with his efforts to obtain gold from seawater, used telepathic suggestion in order to induce the signing of checks and documents. Before a visitor was expected for an interview, he would sit down and concentrate upon him. So strong was the influence thus exerted that a man of my acquaintance threw up a post he held under him because of the undue mental influence he felt was being exerted over himself, and another resigned off the board of one of his companies for the same reason. In both these cases, an adequate motive for the mental attack is not far to seek. Compare these 2 cases with the previous one, and the difference can readily be perceived. We should, however, be just as cautious in deciding there is nothing wrong as in accepting at their face value any statements that may be made to us. Moreover, we should always bear in mind when dealing with a person who is obviously mentally unbalanced and who alleges a psychic attack, that the mental unbalance may have been induced by the psychic attack. Life is a strange thing at best, and many things that are stranger than usual can happen to those who move in occult circles. 10. Non-occult dangers of the Black Lodge. The facts considered in the previous chapter, though they should make us exceedingly careful in weighing evidence, must not blind us to the fact that there are black sheep in every fold, and that a fraternity which started out with the best of intentions may quite inadvertently, through the ignorance or imperfections of its leaders, begin to drift onto the left-hand path. Perfectly innocent people enter it when it is in process of drifting, but not yet avowedly black, and may find themselves in waters that are unpleasantly dirty, even if not actually dangerous. The esoteric dangers will be studied in detail in the next chapter, but we may very well consider in this place the exoteric dangers which may occur behind the veil of the temple, for human nature is much the same wherever we meet it, and shows little originality in choosing its road to the pit. It might be thought that in such a book as this there were no need to touch upon these matters, but if this book is to serve the purposes for which it is intended, it is necessary to do so for 3 reasons. Firstly, because the greater proportion of the students of esotericism are women, and even in these enlightened days they are usually ignorant of the life of the underworld, and a Black Lodge leads by a straight and narrow way into the land of Apaches and demi-mondaines, quite apart from its other drawbacks. Secondly, a knowledge of these facts is essential for differential diagnosis. Thirdly, occult powers are not infrequently used to obtain purely mundane ends. Therefore, when the question of ordinary criminality occurs in connection with an occult organization, the issue may be complicated by an admixture of methods that belong to another plane. We must always remember that a lodge may not necessarily have been formed for the express purpose of evading the law. It may have started with a perfectly legitimate end in view, and have been exploited by evildoers for their own purposes, for, owing to the secretive nature of its proceedings, the fraternity form of organization lends itself to various forms of law-breaking. One occult organization is well known to have been involved in the drug traffic, another is riddled with unnatural vice, a third degenerated into what was little better than a house of ill fame, and its head was an expert abortionist. Others have been involved in subversive politics. Those who join fraternities without properly investigating them and the credentials of those who are running them may find themselves involved in any or all of these things. Behind the veil of secrecy, guarded by impressive oaths, many things may happen, and it is therefore essential to inform oneself most carefully concerning the character, credentials, and record of the leaders of an organization. If these are not readily accessible, something is wrong. The mysterious stranger who has just arrived from the East or the continent, both rather vague addresses, is probably a fraud. If difficulty is experienced in discovering the antecedents of an alleged adept, inquiries could be made of the well-known periodical Truth of Carteret Street, SWI. Truth was originally founded to expose abuses in financial and public life, and for this purpose keeps a blacklist of individuals who are better avoided. It is fair and fearless in its methods, neither a persecutor nor a respecter of persons. It keeps a watchful eye upon the occult field, and pillories charlatans, a task for which it should have the gratitude and support of all who have the cause of the wisdom religion at heart. The commonest danger to which a person who gets into the company of undesirables is exposed is to be induced to part with more money than is convenient by the time-honored expedients of either swindling or blackmailing, the latter being by far the commonest form of unpleasantness in black lodges. The one and only remedy in all such cases is to place the matter into the hands of the police. Firstly, it is your duty as a citizen in order that others may not be victimized as you have been. Secondly, if you don't, your persecutors will not leave you until they have sucked you absolutely dry, and not even then, if they can still find a use for you as a cat's paw. A blackmailer is never got rid of by giving him money. It is merely an invitation to call again. Act quickly and firmly at the outset, and you will soon be at the end of your troubles. To demand money with threats is blackmail, and to coerce to any course of action by threats is also a crime. Any arrangements entered into or documents signed in consequence of threats are not binding. Threats need not necessarily be gross and open, such as the pointing of a revolver. Anything which coerces you against your inclinations may be interpreted as a threat. For instance, supposing it were intimated to you, however tactfully, that if you did not subscribe to the funds of an organization, your interest in occultism would be liable to be gossiped about and possibly involve you in unpleasantness with your relatives or your employers. This, in the eyes of the law, would be blackmail. Anything, in fact, which plays upon a person's fears is a threat. Let us now consider what is the best thing to do if you are being threatened. It is seldom wise to answer threat with threat. The best thing is to reply that you will think it over and see what can be done, and then go straight to the nearest police station and tell the whole story. You can be sure of the utmost courtesy and kindness, and that every effort will be made to help you, even if you have to admit that you have not been wholly blameless yourself. In coming to the police and telling them frankly the position of affairs you have, in popular language, turned king's evidence, and the authorities will go a long way to protect anyone who does this. Do not be deterred by the fact that you cannot bring forward any additional testimony in support of your statement. The police may tell you that there is not sufficient evidence for them to apply for a warrant. Nevertheless, they will make enquiries, and the very fact that the police are making enquiries will be sufficient to frighten blackmailers out of their wits and probably out of the country, nor will they usually stop to make the threatened disclosures en route, but will go while the going is good. Moreover, your complaint will go on to the police records, and a watch will be kept. In due course, another complaint may be made, or, for all you know, may already have been made, and then the net begins to tighten. Always remember that the blackmailer has a great deal more to fear from exposure than you have, for whatever unpleasantness may be in store for you, he has to look forward to a long term of penal servitude, and possibly the dreaded cat if the case is a bad one. A timely reminder of this fact works wonders with prospective blackmailers. Nor need the fear of exposure of your own shortcomings deter you. The nature of the charges brought against you by the blackmailer will never be mentioned. It is not you who are being tried. Neither will your identity be disclosed. You will be referred to as Mr. A or Mrs. B. Far from being treated as an evildoer or having the finger of scorn pointed at you, you will find that you are looked upon as a person who is performing a public service, and every effort will be made by those in authority to smooth your path. A determined effort is being made at the present time to stamp out this abominable crime, and judges are giving exemplary sentences and protecting prosecutors in every way in order to encourage them to come forward. But quite apart from any form of coercion, unwary persons may, while filled with enthusiasm or glamored by the new revelation, part with considerably more money than they can comfortably spare. They may even literally lay their all upon the altar, and then, disillusioned by subsequent events, greatly regret having done so. In many such cases, a competent solicitor can secure a refund. The courts do not look with favor on excessive contributions to movements. It goes without saying that no rightly conducted organization would consent to augment its funds at the expense of the ruin of one of its members. It must, of course, equally protect itself against capriciousness and spite and the machinations of the kind of mentality that tries to buy influence by subscriptions. It has always been our custom in the Fraternity of the Inner Light to insist that any woman who proposes to give a large donation should consult her financial advisor before doing so. For one reason or another, we have refused upwards of £25,000 during the last 7 years, nor have we had any reason at regret having done so. The strength of an occult organization does not lie upon the physical plane. It is well known that there are various drugs which can be used to exalt consciousness and induce a temporary psychism. It may not be equally well known that most of these substances come under the regulations of the Dangerous Drugs Act, and that to obtain them from irregular sources, or even to be found in possession of them save for a legitimate purpose, is to render oneself liable to prosecution, and in this case, too, the authorities are exceedingly alert. All initiates of the right-hand path agree in declaring that to exalt consciousness by means of drugs is a dangerous and undesirable proceeding. There may be research workers who, for legitimate reasons, wish to undertake experiments, but I cannot conceive of any legitimate reason for introducing a neophyte to the drug habit. In any case, if such experiments are undertaken, they should be conducted under the supervision of a qualified medical practitioner who will be in a position to prevent catastrophe or deal with it should it arise. The drugs that alter consciousness also affect the heart, and hearts are not always all they should be. Moreover, the composition of rare drugs is not standardized and varies enormously. They are liable to contain various impurities, and samples may turn out to be unusually toxic. The unpleasantness of having upon one's hands an unexpected and unaccountable corpse is only exceeded by the unpleasantness of becoming the corpse oneself, either of which eventualities may happen when people begin to experiment with the drugs that unloose the girders of the mind. The morals of mankind in general leave much to be desired from the point of view of the purist, and the occult organizations, occupying as they do the seacoast of Bohemia, leave more than usual. A few of the best, maintaining that occultism is essentially a religion, uphold a high standard. The remainder are blessed with a kaleidoscope collection of soulmates. This need not concern us here. If people choose to kick over Mrs. Grundy's apron strings, that is their affair, nor need we at the moment consider the occult abuses of sex force, which will require detailed consideration in their proper place. All we need consider in this chapter is the purely normal form of loose living which is camouflaged under a pretense of occultism. Of this I have seen numerous cases. The head of one group systematically seduced his pupils under the pretext that it was part of their initiation, and the group accepted the situation in a spirit of the purest self-sacrifice. Several others sailed unpleasantly near the wind, with the result that crushes and the subsequent nervous breakdowns were very prevalent. It ought hardly to be necessary to say that such methods form no part of the right-hand path. It is amazing to what an extent women of the highest ideals and of good family and wide culture can be induced to accept such theories and practices. The danger of membership of such a group to young girls or unsophisticated women can readily be imagined. I have often been accused of being narrow-minded in my attitude towards groups in which such happenings are allowed to go on, but the cost in human suffering is so great and the general demoralization so sordid that tolerance comes perilously near to cynicism. It may not generally be realized, but there is just as much danger of corruption in a black lodge for boys and youths as there is for women. There have been a number of cases so flagrant that the police have intervened, both here and abroad. In ancient times, and among primitive peoples, human sacrifice was a common incident in connection with occult practices. It is not unknown in Eastern Europe even at the present day. The nursery story of Bluebeard has its origin in the practices of the infamous Gilles de Rais, Marshal of France and comrade of Joan of Arc, who slaughtered innumerable children and youths in connection with his magical experiments. I have never heard of a case in England, but there have been at various times some curious killings reported from the United States, which look suspiciously like ritual murders, but in the absence of adequate information, it is impossible to come to a final conclusion upon them. There recently came into my hands, however, a book upon magic published for private circulation, in which the statement is made that the ideal blood sacrifice is a male child. The charge of revolutionary activities is one that has been frequently made against the occult movement. There are certain things, however, which must be borne in mind when assessing the truth of this charge. Firstly, the occult movement is not a homogeneous whole. It is totally unorganized and unregulated, and may best be likened to the state of England before the Norman conquest. Conditions in the various groups and associations vary widely, and what is true of one may not be true of another. There can be no doubt whatsoever that various organizations, at various times, have been implicated in politics, as witnessed the Theosophical Society's association with Indian political movements. But we must bear in mind that one generation's revolutionaries are the next generation's reactionaries. After all, politics are a matter of opinion, and even the people we disagree with may turn out to be right in the end. I, personally, am of the opinion that an occult fraternity is extremely ill-advised to concern itself with politics for reasons which I have stated in another of my books, Sane Occultism, and which I will not enter upon now, as they are not relevant to these pages. But as folk from time immemorial have banded themselves together for political action, we cannot very well take exception to what the law permits. People who join an organization established for political work join it with their eyes open and presumably for the purposes for which it was founded. Grounds for objection arise, however, when an organization is founded for non-political pursuits and subsequently the leaders, without consulting or even informing their supporters, take up political activities on their own account and use their organization for the purpose, thus involving their followers without their consent in whatever complications may arise, and using money contributed for a specific purpose for ends other than the donors had in view. It may be wondered what use, at the present day, revolutionaries could make of the occult organizations. Within my personal knowledge, they have used or attempted to use them for the purpose of getting letters to people whose correspondence is being watched, and I myself once received a request to allow a person who had been deported to return to the country under an assumed name and reside in one of our community houses as a member, and was offered some hundreds of pounds for so doing. Needless to say, the correspondence was sent straight to the authorities. The problems which we have considered in this chapter are not peculiar to occult fraternities, but are common to any organization which does not discriminate as to its members. The organizations which advertise must perforce take all concerns and sort them out in the light of subsequent experience, and some of these experiences can be very queer indeed. One cannot blame an organization that picks up an occasional black sheep. One only takes exception if it retains an accumulation of them. A lodge of dubious whiteness can be readily recognized by the type of people who belong to it, who may best be described as the seedy adventurer type with a sprinkling of smart society folk who often have a taste for crude flavors in the way of sensation. The really black lodges are as carefully guarded as the high-grade white lodges, and no outsider can gain entrance to them. The serious student of black occultism is out for knowledge and magical experiment, and he is not going to waste his time on a tyro. Those who choose to graduate into a black lodge after serving their apprenticeship in the outer court of a white lodge do so with their eyes open, and experience must be their teacher. One cannot feel that they deserve much sympathy if the experience is a painful one. The person I am out to help is the person who is a victim, not the one who is hoist with his own petard. The man or woman who, rejecting the steady grade of the way of initiation, chooses to go up with rocket had better come down with the stick. Any request for a large sum of money should always be regarded as a danger signal. It is one of the strictest conditions of initiation that occult knowledge may never be sold or used for gain. I know of an occultist who charges £300 for one of the initiations he confers, and he will give it to anyone who has got £300. In my opinion, the person who pays out £300 for such a purpose deserves the kind of initiation he is going to get. It is also a bad sign when an occultist makes free with signs and wonders before the uninitiated. No genuine adept ever does this. The person who reads your past incarnations, describes your aura, rolls up his eyes, twitches and gives you a message from your master as soon as he is introduced, is a person to be avoided. The more I see of the occult movement, the more I am amazed at the things people can say and do and get away with. The average person is out of his depth when he deals with psychic matters. He usually goes through 3 phases. Firstly, he thinks it is all superstition and fraud. Secondly, his skepticism being breached, he will believe anything. Thirdly, if he ever gets as far as thirdly, he learns discrimination and distinguishes between the black fraternities, the white fraternities, and distinguishes between the black fraternities, the white fraternities, and fatuous fraternities. 11. The psychic element in mental disturbance. We have seen in a previous chapter that nervous and mental disorders can simulate a psychic attack, especially if the subject is familiar with the terminology of occultism. We must also consider the part played by psychic attack in nervous and mental disorders. But before we can embark upon this section of our studies, we must give a brief explanation of the nature of nervous and mental disturbances and the distinction between them. We will not go into academic considerations, for these pages are not written for the orthodox professional psychologist, who has an abundance of textbooks at his disposal, but for the person whose interest is primarily in occult matters, and who comes to the study of the subject unequipped with the technicalities of psychology and psychophysiology, 2 sciences of which at least a working knowledge is exceedingly necessary in the pursuit of practical occultism. In the course of an incarnation, the mind is built up on the foundations of the traits of the higher self, or individuality, which is the immortal soul that develops in the course of an evolution. The mind, therefore, is part of the personality, the unit of incarnation, commencing at birth and dissolving at death, its essence being absorbed by the individuality, which evolves thereby. Note: the personality is the ego or external identity or ordinary consciousness of a person, and the individuality is the higher self, or spiritual component of a person. The mind is essentially the organ of adaptation to the environment, and it is when that adaptation fails that neurotic and hysterical trouble begins. Each living creature is the channel for a current of life force which proceeds from the Logos, the creator of this universe. This current is divided into three main channels, represented to us as the three great natural instincts: self-preservation, reproduction, and the social instinct. These are the mainsprings of our lives. The pressure of life itself is behind them, and if they are thwarted beyond their power of compensation, considerable as that is, they are like streams whose channels are blocked, and which in consequence overflow and make a morass of the adjacent land. Emotion is the subjective aspect of an instinct. That is to say, when an instinct is at work, we feel emotion. Every emotion we feel can be referred to one or other of the instincts. Our resentment of a slur upon our dignity has its roots in the instinct of self-preservation. Our love of art has its roots in the instinct of love, beauty, and creative expression, which upon its lowest arc is called sex. Each of these instincts has its high spiritual aspect and its elemental physical aspect, and transmutation from one plane to another takes place freely, so that unless we understand the significance of these manifestations, we shall be misled. In their understanding is the key to the science of life. If one of these great instincts is so thwarted that all attempts at compensation break down, or if the temperament is so inelastic and unaccommodating that it will not modify its demands, the ego makes a final, desperate attempt at adjustment, which goes outside the limits within which harmonious relations with the environment can be maintained. Communications with the environment break down, and the mind has, in part at least, quitted the sphere of reality for the sphere of imagination. The sense of fixed values is lost, and things assume a symbolic importance. This breakdown may be partial, relating to certain aspects of the life only, or it may be total. In hysteria, the dammed-up forces of life remain in the channel, but spurt with concentrated force through any sluice that may be opened to them. Consequently, instead of the river below the obstruction being a smooth-flowing body of water, it descends in rapids and whirlpools difficult and dangerous to navigate, so that the bark of life makes shipwreck therein. The surrounding country, too, is reduced to a morass, neither land nor water. In other words, the temperament becomes tempestuous and unduly emotional, and the non-emotional factors of the mind, such as judgment and self-control, are demoralized. Such a temperament must of necessity be perpetually in difficulties with life, and periodically the repressed emotions boil over in fits of screaming, crying, and convulsive muscular movements, which act as safety valves and relieve the pressure temporarily. The neurotic differs from the hysteric in certain well-marked ways, which need to be carefully borne in mind, as they are very important from the practical standpoint. The troubles of the neurotic start in the same way as those of the hysteric, being due to repressed emotion and failure to adapt to an environment. But in his case, the life forces set to work to cut fresh channels for themselves that shall circumvent the obstacle which blocks their path. Consequently, we get what the psychologist calls displacement of emotion. Some comparatively innocuous matter becomes the object of an outpouring of emotion which in no way concerns it, for it has been made a substitute for something else. It is the curious underground tracking of emotion in the mind which causes so much trouble, for the sufferer is not insane, and yet certain sections of his values and reactions to life are perverted. He is an extremely tricky person to deal with because he is given to unexpected and quite irrational loves and hates and fears, and acts accordingly. Similar conditions prevail in the organic insanities. The psychological results are the same, but because the origin is physical, not mental, they are but little amenable to psychotherapy. Certain things can be done to alleviate them, however, even if they are not entirely curable. Therefore, let us consider them from both the psychophysical and occult standpoints. The body is the vehicle of the mind. If the vehicle be faulty, the mind cannot express itself accurately. Its reactions will be distorted. Orthodox science says that the brain is the organ of the mind, but esoteric science says the brain is the organ of perception of sense impressions and coordination of efferent impulses. That is the telephone exchange of the nervous system. It is only one of the points where mind touches body, the others being the ductless glands of the endocrine system, the pineal, pituitary, thyroid, adrenals, thymus, and gonads, to which may be added the solar plexus and sacral plexus. The student of tantric physiology will be very dull if he has not observed that the chakras coincide in their physical location with the endocrine organs. Now, the endocrines have for their task the maintenance of the chemical composition of the blood. They pour into it their secretions, called hormones, in certain balanced proportions. If the balance is in any way upset, either by an overplus of one secretion or shortage of another, profound changes in metabolism take place. The whole of the life processes are regulated by the endocrines and can be speeded up or slowed down in their different aspects as the balance of the endocrines alters. This endocrine balance is known by physiologists to be intimately associated with emotional states, and especially with the alertness or stolidity of the temperament. Psychologists do not sufficiently appreciate the importance of the recent work upon the endocrines, but occultists have a knowledge of this aspect of psychophysiology as part of their traditional teaching. The breathing exercises of the yoga system are based upon this knowledge and are exceedingly potent, as are all occult practices which are brought through correctly to the physical plane. In fact, we may say that no occult process is really potent, nor can it be said to have completed its circuit, unless it has its point of contact with dense matter, a point which many occultists leave out of their calculations. Occultism, though primarily a mental process, is not a purely mental process. It is both spiritual and material. In the great majority of cases of insanity, organic brain changes cannot be demonstrated, but alienists are more and more coming to recognize that they may look for the clues of Hecate in the blood. Its chemical composition may depart from normal, whether owing to a change in the hormone balance or to the byproducts of disease. This change in the blood chemistry is immediately followed by a change in the emotional tone. It may become over-emotional or depressed, apathetic or irritable. The ancients described these conditions admirably as the four humors: the sanguine, the bilious, the lymphatic, and the choleric. It has been abundantly demonstrated by physiologists that emotional states affect the chemical composition of the blood. It is gradually being realized that these changes are brought about through the mediation of the ductless glands, which may be called the emotional brain, just as the gray matter within the skull may be called the sensory motor brain. It follows, therefore, that if through some interference with their functioning, the glands produce a blood composition corresponding to that produced by them when a particular emotional state is giving its special stimulus, the individual will experience the physical sensations associated with the corresponding emotional state. His mind will proceed to adjust itself to these conditions by accounting for them through the imagination as best it may. So that if there is a state of the blood characteristic of the condition of fear, fear images will arise in the mind. It is upon this basis that the organic insanities produce their characteristic mental states. Whether the emotional state be due to a mental cause or a physical cause, the result is the same for the patient. Organic insanities are distinguished from functional ones solely by their origin. An organic insanity tends to depart further from the normal than a functional nervous disorder, because in the latter a considerable degree of compensation takes place, for the patient can, to a great extent, pull himself together and keep himself from going to disastrous extremes. This is not the case with an organic insanity, which proceeds to its logical conclusion. It is for this reason that a neurotic, although he may suffer severely, seldom has a complete breakdown unless he is sure of the necessities of life. The self-preservation instinct keeps him on his feet. Having considered the physical and subjective bases of mental disturbances, we are now in a position to assess accurately the part played by the unseen. What happens when a neurotic takes up occultism? We can best answer this question by considering what happens when a normal person takes up occultism. He learns for the first time of the existence of the invisible worlds and begins to think about them. Immediately as he does this, he comes into touch with them. At first he may not be able to perceive them consciously. Nevertheless, he is feeling them subconsciously, and they are affecting him. His life shows this to the close observer in 1,000 ways. There are great forces moving like currents in the unseen, and we are drawn into these according to our temperamental affinity for them. The violent personality is drawn into the current of Mars, the emotional, suggestible one into the sphere of Luna. The influences of these spheres play upon them. Now, the occultist, working under a proper system, knowing that he has got to meet these forces sooner or later, picks them up one by one voluntarily and by means of the appropriate rituals, and synthesizes them within his own nature. He knows, too, that each aspect has its obverse. The Virgin Mary is reflected in Lilith. The older faiths knew this, but popular Christianity, which has no roots in tradition, has forgotten it. Protestant Christianity threw away its occult aspect at the Reformation. All the pagan pantheons have gross aspects of divinities as well as ethereal ones. We need to search the refuse heap of history for the lost parts of our own tradition, if our faith is to be complete, and the most profitable line of search is in the Kabbalah and the Gnostic literature. The literature of the Gnosis has been largely destroyed by systematic persecution, but in the Kabbalah there is still left us a complete system. The Jews, being strictly monotheistic, did not speak of gods, but they recognized the hierarchy of angels and archangels, which is the equivalent of the pagan pantheons. It is through these ethereal messengers that the All-Father formed the worlds. Let us consider once more the Kabbalistic doctrine of the Qliphoth, for it has an intimate bearing upon the problem of insanity. The doctrine of the 10 holy Sephiroth, arranged in their correct pattern to form the tree of life, is invaluable in enabling us to conceive the invisible. The first Sephirah is concentrated out of the unmanifest, the point within the circle. This emanates the second, which in its turn emanates the third. As soon as one has emanated another, these two are said to be equilibrated, but when emanation is in process, there is a period of unbalanced force. This, as it were, goes off by itself in the cosmos and establishes a sphere of its own, unconnected with the cosmic system. Consequently, each sphere of the cosmos has its counterpart in chaos, in miniature, it is true, but nevertheless potent and functional. Each sphere, in the course of its evolution, builds up an oversoul, which is called by different names in different systems. In the Kabbalistic system, we call them the archangels, the spirits before the throne. The sphere of the sun is represented by Raphael, the sphere of the moon by Gabriel. The obverse Sephiroth or Qliphoth build up in exactly the same way. In the habitations of hell, these two are known as the disputers and the obscene ones, whose names sufficiently indicate their characters. The sphere of the sun is also the point of manifestation of the Messiah or Savior upon earth. The Prince of Peace has his obverse in the disputers. Who that has had the vision beautiful does not know the reaction that follows it, and the need of wisdom, self-control, and patience to deal with the forces that are released, not only in the soul, but in the environment. It is for this reason that periods of purgation and discipline precede all revelations. We must keep the vigil before we can sit at the feast. Consciousness, released from the sphere of earth, rises straight upwards to the sphere of the moon. This is the negative, feminine, receptive, psychic sphere. From thence it passes onwards to the sphere of the sun. This is the positive, masculine sphere of the higher consciousness, the vision of the seer as distinguished from the psychic. Upon either hand, the path is flanked by the spheres of hermetic wisdom and elemental beauty. These spheres, which have had to do with the grades of initiation, need not concern us in the present pages. We shall only have to do with the sphere of the moon, Luna, the mistress of the lunatic. Now Luna was represented by the ancients under diverse forms as Diana, the chaste huntress, symbol of sublimation, and Hecate, patroness of witchcraft and childbirth. We have already noted that the Qliphoth of the sphere of Luna are called the obscene ones. Hence it is that when the unstable soul advances by the path of Saturn that bridges the astral and enters the sphere of Luna, he touches her Hecate aspect and finds himself en rapport with the Gamaliel, the obscene ones, whose chief is Lilith, she who giveth lustful dreams. Need we then wonder that Freud finds the dreams of the neurotic filled with sexual images in their most perverted and debased forms? The rabbis knew their psychology just as well as he does. As has already been noted, the neurotic is very often psychic, and the psychic is very often neurotic. What may we expect to happen to the soul that has taken initiation in a past life? retains subconsciously the psychic development thus conferred, and finds itself incarnated in a neurotic personality in this life. He will come under the dark dominion of the moon, and Lilith will be his mistress. Through the ill-fitting doors of the neurotic temperament, the forces of the abyss find ingress. The dissociated complexes of the microcosm are reinforced by the dissociated complexes of the macrocosm, for that is precisely what the Qliphoth are. Occultists and their ignorant admirers, the superstitious, have always held that insanity had to do with demonic possession. Modern medicine disputes this and declares the various manifestations of the diseased mind to be due entirely to subjective psychological processes. At present, these two schools of thought are like two armed camps, drawn up for battle and shaking their weapons at each other. Each is too sure of his own ground to be willing to give the other a hearing. It is my belief that a common ground can be found for the meeting of these two opposing viewpoints. Psychology demonstrates the mechanism of the mind and can explain the mental processes whereby the ideas of the deranged assume their ultimate form. It can show the connection between these ideas and the dreams of the normal mentality. What it cannot explain is the fundamental difference between these subjective states and the normal waking consciousness. It is here that the occultist can tell the psychologist something that is worth his while to hear, for he can show how these visions can be produced experimentally and at will by means of ceremonial magic. And still more important, the occultist can show him how these visions can be dispersed and the psychic faculties closed down and sealed. This brings us to the practical art of our considerations. How far can the methods of ritual magic be applied to the relief of mental disease? They are undoubtedly palliative, but they will not produce a permanent cure unless the origin of the disturbed mental condition is found and cleared up. Unless this be done, as fast as we disperse the phantoms, they will reform, because the mental state of the patient is invoking them. Under such circumstances, no magic circle can be kept intact. As fast as we break the rapport with the abyss, the patient renews it. But such conditions constitute a vicious circle. The qliphotic forces with which a contact has been established will actively develop it and will hold on to their victim when attempts are made to dislodge them. In this rationalistic age, we are apt to forget that there is such a thing as organized and intelligent evil. If the physical causes of this disturbance have been cleared up, the septic focus eradicated, or the tumor pressing upon the ductless gland excised, and still the mentality does not return to normal, an exorcism will often produce immediate and marked results. In the case of the neurotic, whose trouble is entirely in the sphere of the mind, an exorcism is of enormous value as a preliminary to the appropriate psychotherapeutic treatment, because it clears the ground and prevents reinfection, giving the patient a chance to make a fresh start. It is possible for the qliphotic demons to gain so powerful a hypnotic influence over a victim that he is powerless to break it by any effort of his own will, nor can the orthodox type of psychotherapy touch the root of the trouble. The exorcism may have to be repeated 2 or 3 times in the course of the treatment, because the rapports may be renewed after they have been broken. But once the patient's complexes have been cleared up, they will not return. In any case, an exorcism produces marked temporary benefit. During the lull, the patient gets a chance to pull himself together, and the evil influences are undermined. A courageous patient who is cooperating intelligently will seldom have to be exorcised more than 3 times, provided material conditions are favorable. I have seen cases cleared by a single exorcism and remaining well indefinitely so long as the patient obeyed instructions and had nothing whatever to do with the unseen, neither reading books upon occultism nor associating with people who were interested in such subjects. And I have also seen the abyss reestablish its influence when the patient disobeyed instructions and reawakened the old vibrations. We need to realize that the human consciousness is not a closed vessel, but, like the body, has a continual intake and output. The cosmic forces are circulating through it all the time, like seawater through a living sponge. Whatever emotional state may arise within us is reinforced from outside. The subjective self only has the kindling. The cosmos supplies the fuel. Once the fire is started, the cosmic forces of the appropriate type will stoke it. Just as the devout Catholic is inspired by the influence of his patron saint, invoked by prayer, so the neurotic is hag-ridden by his obsessive demon, invoked by the morbid broodings of the dissociated subconsciousness. The occultist maintains that the generalized principle of evil has its intelligent channels, just as the organized principle of good has its ministering spirits. Any observer who considers the phenomena of mental disturbance will find much to support this hypothesis. The question of obsession is an exceedingly important one. The word is used very freely in occult circles and is held to mean the withdrawal of a soul from its body and its replacement by another soul, but I doubt whether this is a true representation of what happens. It has always appeared to me that in obsession we have not got the actual replacement of one soul by another, but the complete domination of one soul by another. It is a hypnotic domination, and we can explain it in terms of the known psychology of hypnosis, the hypnotist in the case being an astral entity. There is an operation in magic known as assuming the god form, in which the operator identifies himself in imagination with the god, and so becomes a channel for its power. It is one of the special modes of Egyptian magic, wherein the priest always wore a mask to represent the animal head symbolically attributed to the god he represented. This imaginative identification is a method well known in occultism and is often employed in order to enter into the inner life of a plant or a crystal as a mental exercise. The effects of it are very marked and very peculiar. I am inclined to think that it is this method, combined with hypnosis, which is used by the obsessing entity, which first identifies itself with its victim and then superimposes its own personality upon his, thus obtaining a vehicle of manifestation. I am also of the opinion, however, that it is only in certain abnormal states, whether induced by disease of mind or body, or by some of the more drastic operations of black magic, that this imposition can take place.